Okay, preparing sweet potatoes for any dish requires getting rid of the peel. Any good mother-in-law will know that. Any good daughter-in-law will learn it. Now, peeling a sweet potato is just a little harder than your run-of-the-mill white, yellow, or table mashed tater type. So this could be quite a challenge. I normally cheat and do it the old-fashioned way. However, this is not considered proper etiquette in the modern kitchen. And since I am not in a modern kitchen, I can do it any old way I want. So once we get the tater peeled, as you can see, the peel, even though it's been washed, is still kind of making a grubby mark. We will get rid of that. It isn't going to hurt anything, but if you want your sweet taters to look good, you don't want to have that on them. So, in my case, I usually leave it on because I don't like to fidget with all that. But we can cut the worst of it off. Proper etiquette says push the knife away. And for safety reasons, you should. There we have the tater. Now what you do with it, whether you're shredding it or cutting it, will make a big difference in your dish. Chopping a sweet potato is best for candied sweet potatoes or boil them to mash them. So in this case, we're going to cut even sized chunks because this one is going to be mashed. There ain't too much of anything better than mashed sweet potatoes. However, I put in the work. Now normally I clean up all this mess before I go to the next step, but since I'm shooting video, we're going to leave it here for now. Now as you notice, they should be fairly even sized, but it's not going to make a lot of difference if they are not. So, will not bore you with a video of me chopping everything here, but you get the idea. Always be careful with your knife, use the surface, and we'll see you in the next part of the video. Now that your tater is cut up, you want to add water to cover the top and then put it on heat. Not quite too high, but you want it to get to cooking pretty quick because sometimes in the air these get a little funny colored. Now occasionally you might miss a peel or see a spot that was under the peel. That ain't gonna hurt anything. And of course now you have to let time do its magic. Bad thing about cooking anything that's starchy like this is you don't want to walk away too long because it tends to boil up and then boil over. But we are not going to let that happen here, are we? Anyway, we just let time do its thing. It's have been cooking, and I calmed it down a bit so the steam wouldn't get up in the video. But how do you know it's done? Well, you carefully use a fork, and you can kind of tell there, but if you can't get a good grip on it, use a plate, pull one out. You should be able to pierce it easily. Now, what do you do now? Good question. If you want to just serve these as they are with a little butter and sugar, you can. However, for our purposes, we are going to drain these carefully and then mash them. And the mash can be used in many ways, but I'm going to use it for a special recipe, and that is coming up next. At the last video, I promised that I was going to have a surprise, and this is it. However, part of the video got cut off because the camera malfunctioned. So, the part you missed was the mashing of the sweet potato. And just a potato masher or fork will do it. Sadly, you missed out on that fun. Anyway, the first thing we're going to do for this little recipe is grease our pan. Now you're going to wonder why I'm not spraying it. Oh, by the way, I did fix the nail polish. And anyway, When you grease a pan with this, a brand name, can be the store brand, it tends to stick a little less, even though this says nonstick pan. Don't believe it. It lies. Anyway, the pan you want is considered a hamburger bun pan. I rarely ever use it for that, but for the sake of this recipe, we will. And whether you want to call this a donut or a muffin, whatever you want to call it, it is a really good way to use your sweet potatoes. And the recipe will be in my recipe book, which you will be able to get online as soon as I upload it. Don't hold your breath, because it'll be a little bit. Anyway, we got the hard part done, the messy part. And now, we set this aside. Now our oven is heating to 350 degrees. It's already hot and waiting on us. So, let's start our project. Now, we need to mix our batter for our sweet potato muffin, donut, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure what I'll call it in the cookbook, but by the time I publish it, I'll have that ironed out. And I see I missed one thing. Well, we can get it later. Anyhow, for our recipe, we're going to use dry goods and wet goods. And that's important to know about that, because in other recipes you have to do the same thing. So get used to doing it. It will improve the quality of your product if you actually follow this method. Okay, for bowl number 1 and bowl number 2, for bowl 1, we're going to mix our dry goods. And right here I got 3/4 cup of flour. Now that's all-purpose flour, not self-rising. And to that I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking powder and a teaspoon of cinnamon. I mixed the two together in my little cup here. Now, the teaspoon cinnamon, if you're not a fan of cinnamon, you can always either leave it out or just use a pinch. It is totally up to you. So, now I have a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. Now, when you measure brown sugar, you want to pack it tightly into the measuring cup. Brown sugar is not the same as your white table sugar. It's much moister, and of course, you know it tastes better. So let's put that all together. And we're just going to give that a few stirs. I see we got some crumbs already trying to get in the bowl. We haven't even baked yet. To be honest, I baked a batch earlier, and they have since disappeared. Okay, you don't have to get super fancy on the mix, just so it's incorporated enough that you don't have any lumps in there. Not very tasty when they're that way. Okay, the wet ingredients. We have our sweet potato, which is a 1/2 cup. We have an egg. And now, the melted butter. A little note about the melted butter. This is a 1/4 cup. You want to melt it and then let it cool, because if you put that hot butter in with the egg, you're going to have an omelet and not what you're looking for. Okay, and of course that's a real butter, so, you know, take it for what it is. Now we want to mix that around. Now I mashed that tater really good so it's not all stringy. Sometimes they can have a fibrous texture, and you may want to run them through a food processor, but if you don't really mind that texture, you can go right ahead and bake with it. It's not going to make a lot of difference. Now we're just going to give that a good enough stir that there won't be any humps of egg in there. Now, that's probably good enough. You can mix it more, but that should do the trick. I'm going to put that all together. Set the dishes aside. now we're going to carefully mix that in. I prefer a wooden spoon to a mixer. It's just an old-fashioned thing. But also, if you overmix baked goods, sometimes the texture's kind of not that desirable. Sometimes you can just get a little too zealous in your baking process. You want to get all that dry stuff mixed in. And if you look real close, you can see some chunks of sweet potato. That just gives it texture, don't worry about it. Okay, now we're going to set that aside. And we're going to work on our cream cheese layer. Now for that, I find a fork works about the best of anything. And so, we've got 4 ounces of cream cheese, and I left it out to soften. As you can see, it's pretty soft. And 1 tablespoon butter. Now, a word about this butter. You want to let it soften to room temperature, but you do not want to melt it, because if you melt it, your cream cheese is going to be nasty. Just a little tip and trick for you. Now, we're going to mash that all together. Whoops. Hopefully more graceful than I have. Incorporate that butter into the cream cheese. Now, if you don't have it all the way mixed for the next addition, it's not going to be super important, but by the time you're done, you do want it mixed. And let's put a little vanilla in. You don't need very much for this. There's not much there. Okay. Oh, I forgot to put the teaspoon of vanilla into the sweet potatoes. Teaspoon into the sweet potatoes. Alright, now we're going to put that aside. I'm going to go back and finish mixing that in. That should have went in with the wet ingredients. That was my poor choice of action there. So now you want to mix that in a little bit. Now the vanilla will turn it a little bit creamier colored. That's not really going to matter in this recipe, because when you get the streusel on and all that, you're not going to really see a lot of that. Okay, so now we have powdered sugar. Now the thing about powdered sugar is it naturally has a little bit of cornstarch in it, and got cream cheese all over me. So it's not just sugar, and the cornstarch in there will help with the texture of this when it's baking. Now you may find after you mix it in that your particular cream cheese or your particular powdered sugar may require a little additional powdered sugar, just the way the cheeses are. It's kind of like baking with flour. It's vary in consistency sometimes, and you have to be aware of that and adjust accordingly. And I'm making one big mess, but that's part of the process. If your kitchen's not a mess when you're done, you probably didn't do it right. I'm deliberately using a paper bowl because I don't really like cleaning this out in the dishwasher. So, it's saving myself some room in the sink for things that I prefer to wash. Okay, now this particular time, that's probably adequate. Cream cheese and powdered sugar. It's going to turn out about right. But if it's really runny, you want to add a little more of the powdered sugar. And if it's a little dry, you may need to add either a little more butter or a little more cream cheese. I wouldn't recommend more cream cheese because this has a strong cream cheese flavor as it is. You get too much, it kind of takes away from the product rather than enhancing it. Okay. That looks pretty good. As you can see, kind of like a buttercream frosting. It's basically what you're making here. But anyhow, we're going to set that aside. And now the real fun one. If you get some aggression, this part is perfect. we are going to make the streusel. Now, there's one thing to know about streusel. When you make it, you got to have cold butter, and you want to make sure that butter is very cold. Don't leave it sitting on the counter while you mix this stuff. You want to do it right at the last moment. So I'm going to go get the butter, and I'll be right back. We're going to use a 1/4 cup butter, which is half a stick, and it does mix better if you chop it up just a little, but you don't want to handle it a lot and soften it. You'll regret that. Okay, I keep having camera malfunctions, so hopefully you caught most of what we did. We're making the streusel, and if the camera did not catch it, I will put the recipe not only in the cookbook, but I'll put it below. But anyway, we're making the streusel. This is the butter, the flour, the brown sugar, and we're just going to keep mixing it until it's crumbly. You do not want a smooth batter, you want crumbles. Sometimes they say when you make stuff like this to make it resemble cornmeal, but I don't really think it resembles cornmeal. Let's hope it doesn't taste like cornmeal. Anyway, we're working on that. And that's about right there. Yeah, it looks awful. Trust me, it's good. Now we can remove the rubber glove. See? Easy cleanup. Now except for the countertop, that makes a mess. Alright, now we got our pan with the grease, and we're going to take our sweet potato, I'm going to try to say potato, not tater, and divide it evenly amongst these 6. Now, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you want it pretty close so they bake evenly. There we go. Now, I designed this recipe to fit pretty evenly in this pan. However, depending on your pans and what you're doing with it, you may need to double the recipe. And it should work just fine that way. Just remember about the temperatures of your butter, because it will make or break your dish, as they say. Figuratively, not literally. Okay. Don't want to waste any of that. Now, we're going to even it out a little bit. Don't worry if it's not perfect, because during baking it will spread a bit. Between the egg and the baking powder, it becomes cake-like. Alright. Try not to get any up on here if you can help it. If you do, it's not the end of the world. Alright. Now you've probably been wondering where this goes. Well, take a little bit and put it on top. Try to divide it evenly, just like the batter. It really looks awful right now, but it will look better after it's baked. Think of it like a painting where it starts out, oops, looking like nothing and ended up something. This is difficult to do under a camera. However, we'll make it work. Looks like these could use a little more. These little spatulas are very handy. If you see one in a grocery store, they usually come in packs of a certain number clustered together. I highly recommend you get some. I use them quite often. Just the perfect size for this kind of project. Alright. Nasty mess. Alright, now what we're going to do is put some streusel on top of each one. Grab a little bit and sprinkle it. You may have to just do a little on each one until you get them all distributed, because you want it kind of even. This is another case of why you want to try to keep the parts clean here, because when this bakes on, you have to scrape a little bit to get it off. Do not use abrasive things on your surfaces. They tend to scratch them and make it so things stick in the future a whole lot worse. So like a plastic scrubber. Okay, now we're ready to bake. And like I said, the oven's 350 degrees. And we're going to put it in approximately 20-22 minutes, depending on your oven. You want to check it. What you're looking for is if you put a toothpick into the cake part of this, it should come out clean. Sometimes the cream cheese will stick to it anyway. So you want to try to get the cake part, or when you bounce the finger, you can feel it's done. You just don't want it all gooey like this. So I'm going to say around 21 minutes. So I'll see you then.